How's it going, everyone, and welcome to week 2 of my recording guide series. This week we are going to take a look at basic interface and DAW setup, and we're going to make some guitar tones. So for starters, we're going to look at interface setup, and I have here my Focusrite Scarlett 2i2. And this is the interface that I used for a really long time. It's like a $160 unit, and it's freaking awesome and does exactly everything you could possibly ever need it to do. The most basic of DAW setups is quite literally you take the thing and you plug it in. I mean interface setups. You quite literally take the thing, you plug it into your computer. It's USB. Because you bought, hopefully, a really cheap interface, something like Behringer or like PreSonus or maybe Focusrite, because you bought something super cheap, it will be USB. And that's just by the very nature of it, by a USB interface. However, if you didn't, then that's kind of a problem because I don't know how anything other than a USB interface works. That's that. If you're using Windows, you do have to go online and download the drivers for this thing, and trust me, you want to get the Focusrite drivers. Otherwise, things will not work the way that you need them to. So, included with every Focusrite unit, in fact most interface units to my knowledge, is instructions on how to download and install the drivers. So follow that. Now we're going to take a look at basic DAW setup. And let me pull up Cubase here. So here's how Cubase looks when you first start it up. It's not particularly special, and also this is Cubase 12. I probably will have bought Cubase 13 by the time the tutorial series actually comes out. But the most important things that you want to know about are that if you go up to Studio here, and click Studio Setup, this will bring you to here at the very least, or at least here. Now this is where you can control like all kinds of different things about your device. Here you have the sample rate, which if your sample rate is not at least 44.1 kilohertz, then you have a very serious problem. I always go with 48,000. I always go with 48 kilohertz because that gives you the best like studio quality audio. I don't think my audio devices can actually support anything higher than that, so I just stick with 48,000. The buffer size, this will depend on what kind of things that you're using. So if you're going to be using like a digital amp simulator, for instance, and have it as a plugin on the DAW, I'll show that a little bit later. Then when you're recording, you're going to want this buffer size to be set as low as possible. 64 is usually fairly reasonable, because if you have it much higher than 64, then there will be a lot of latency, and you'll notice it. It'll be very disorienting to actually play. Setting it to 64 is about the point where you can't notice any latency, but it does increase CPU usage, so you'll want to be careful with this. For the purposes of mixing, always turn it up much higher. That'll make things a lot easier on you. Clock source doesn't particularly matter. I don't really know what the SPDIF or ADAT things are, so just stick with internal. And yeah, in here, processing precision, I don't know what that means. I just always have it set to 38-bit flow because there's nothing else. This is pretty much all that there is that you need to do, but if you are using a software that will also use your PC's sound card, turn that the fuck off. Switch to the ASIO drivers, the ASIO drivers. I believe it stands for Audio Source In and Out. And for the purposes of this, I'm using the Focusrite USB ASIO drivers, but then you have like the Thunderbolts. If you have FL Studio, then there's FL Studio things, and I have an Axfex that has that, and I did use a Helix for a time. But of course, since I'm intending on using my Scarlett 18i20, I use the Focusrite USB ASIO. Now, with that being said, we're now going to move on to guitar tones. I will talk about making a recording template, because I do have a recording template here, but that's not something that we're going to do here. Instead, I'm going to load up Fractal Audio's Axe Effects Axe Edit software. So this is Axe Edit. And I'm going to go through creating my tones in the order bass, rhythm, and leads. I will talk a little bit about clean and also some other effects that you'll probably want to create just to fill space, but please note as we proceed that all the tones that I have here are ways that you can go about creating a tone. Please do not copy my settings exactly, especially if you happen to not have a $2,300 unit that is the Axe Effects. If you are using the Axe Effects, everything is built in blocks. I know that this is kind of the case in like Line 6 Helix stuff, and it is also kind of the case in Pod Farm, but it's very obvious blocks in the Axe Effects. And you'll create an input and an output block, click here and then click over here, and that'll link both together. I don't know why you have to do it that way, but it's how the Axe Effects is set up, and it's actually quite nice to have. So let's start with the bass, and I'll go and grab my bass really quick. For the purposes of the song that I'm covering today, I'll be using my Squier jazz bass. Now note it, I have this bass tuned to drop C. That's because that's exactly what I need. So for creating, we're going to start with a clean bass tone here. Now, there are two different kinds of bass tones that I use. I always use a clean or a dirty bass tone, and we're going to start here with the clean bass. The way that I always go about it is I put it in this order. A compressor, an amplifier, the cabinet for that amplifier, a multiband compressor, and then an EQ after that. You don't really need to use that, and I think I actually use this is what I use. Something like that. Anyway, in this case, it's compressor, amp, cab, compressor. The compressor in front is, I'm basically treating this as if I were actually doing this with real amps, because obviously this is not real amps. So I use like an actual, like an emulation of a proper pedal compressor in the front. That then leads into the amplifier, which is the SV bass, which I believe is based off the Ampeg SV thing that exists. I know it does. And these are the settings I typically always use. And ideal is what they look like. I suppose I probably ought not to do that. Please note, by the way, as we're going, there is actually, I believe I put a limiter on the, I put a compressor and then a limiter on the audio here. And OBS is capturing the sounds of the instruments as if it were a microphone input. So they're also going to be compressed and limited. So things might be a smidge loud. I don't know what they sound like until I edit. Anyway, that thing goes into the SV 8x10 cab. The proper refrigerator cabinet is freaking huge. I've seen one in real life and it's freaking huge. And then that then goes into the Studio FB compressor, which is it's like a studio quality compressor. I'm treating it as, like, I'm giving it a little bit of compression on the way in. For distortion bass, I used to be, if I can find it. Sorry, my desk is an absolute disaster. There it is. I used to be very antsy using a pick, but I started doing it a lot more because it sounds really nice. Now, this is not the bass tone I'm going to be using for this. I use a software called Neural DSP Parallax with a custom preset that I made in that. But this is essentially the same bass tone in some capacity. It's basically the same thing. I go pedal compressor first, and then I split the signal here, and then do a pair of EQs. I do a parametric EQ here, which actually, if I disconnect that... So you're getting only the top-end information that I decided I wanted to use for this. Throw an EQ so that way I'm heavily distorting using a black glass or a dark glass B7K emulation. the bass, like the top frequencies of the bass, but not the low frequencies, and that's crucial. Because if I then switch to this, if you're listening on a device that doesn't produce sounds that low, then that just sounded like nothing to you. But I'm doing these EQ moves for a reason, and that's because I need to keep them separate, so that way I'm not heavily distorting the bass frequencies, and I don't like doing that. I don't like having distorted bass frequencies. I avoid it at all costs. Anyway, yeah, these are the settings that I'm using on that. That's the most basic idea. You'll notice I'm not being super specific about anything here, and that's obviously by design. Then it goes into the 8x10 SV cab again. This is both of it combined, and then compressing on the low end here. I'll talk more about this once I get to the mixing side of things. Anyway, next we will move on to the rhythm guitars. For the purposes of this video, I will be using a Warmoth Nomad, my custom-made Warmoth Nomad that has an entire video made for it. Now note that this is the first tone that we're using here that has scenes. This is something you can also kind of do in Helix, but essentially what I'm doing here is I've created, like I have this main rhythm tone, which sounds like this. It was pretty cool. But then I created this. So what I did there is I put a pitch shifter on this second scene. So it's turned off in the first scene, it's bypassed. And then the second one, it's turned on and it's dropped everything by an octave. And I have the mix set to 50%, so you get 50% of the normal distorted tone and then 50% of that octave down tone. And always with pitch shifting things like this, put it at the very front of the signal chain. That's why the drive is here. Because that way the pitch is happening and then all the distortion stages. Because if I move this out here, it's a little bit muddy compared to. So yeah, that's that. And this is a very Periphery type sound. The 6160 block letter into the USA Gent cab. I also had this turned on at one point. This of course being based on the 5150, the PV 5150, which I love how that sounds. And then I threw a compressor on the end. This is something that I always recommend people do, because if I were to chug compared to like chords, you notice the compressor gets hit a little bit harder. I probably ought to bring this down a smidge more. Yes, very prog metal. Anyway, so yeah, just compressor. It's mainly to tame the low end. That is the thing that's for. So yeah, that's that. And it's especially good to have the compressor on this one, because it can get really bassy. That's like a C. That's the very low C, which also then has the octave down of that C, which is the same as the low note C that's on the bass guitar. So, you know, you want to be careful with your bass stuff. Next up, we'll take a look at my lead guitars. Now, the way I'm doing things a little bit differently this year is that I'm bringing back my dueling guitars that I've done in the past, that I've not done in a frickin' really long time. There's a good reason why I did that, but for the purposes of this, I have two lead guitar tones to keep them separated from each other, and I'll be using my PRS SE Standard 24 for lead guitar 1, and then my Cort Z44 for my lead guitar 2. So let's start with lead guitar 1. Alright, sorry about that. Just a little bit of guitar maintenance. Okay, so let's take a look at this lead guitar tone. Now, I know what I said about copying settings. There are times when it's a good idea to do that, especially if there's like a specific sound that you want or a specific sound that you're going for. In this case, I literally copied John Petrucci's settings for his lead tone in some regard. So this is literally just John Petrucci's lead tone. It's pretty freaking cool, isn't it? Anyway, so yeah, that's pretty straightforward, honestly. Into this particular cabinet with a delay that's always on dotted eighth notes that I sometimes change the tempo for, but most of the time I forget to, and it doesn't really matter anyway. Into a compressor just to tame like bass stuff. Etc. etc. So that's pretty much it for this main lead guitar. Now, second thing, of course, is this. And to make it clear, the tones literally are only designed to sound different, so the main thing that changes is the speaker that I use. That's literally it. That is fucking it. I do change the amp. But I really don't need to. I could have kept the exact same amplifier with the exact same settings and just used a different cab, and that would have made the biggest difference. Furthermore, doesn't matter, like, what guitar goes through this. This is just the order, like, you'll see in the scene stuff here. I've actually only titled these scenes just so that I know what guitars are used for what tones, just to keep things distinct. But it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't. I could have kept these in any order, and I didn't care what the order was. This one I did massive bass cut here, so I didn't need to put a compressor on the end. At least I didn't think I did. Anyway, next thing we'll take a look at is clean guitars here, which I do love my split coil. Etc. and etc. Now, something I will say on account of clean tones is that the way that I tend to build clean tones is that I'll have it in such a way that I could use it for both leads and, like, arpeggio stuff. So I'll have it like that, but then I switch to this, it's like... Well, pretty straightforward. Like I do weird things with this. Like I could throw on a chorus if I wanted to. I don't really need the chorus on that. I don't think I'm even gonna be using a clean tone for this. But it's a really nice sound. I love referencing that song, or specifically FamilyJules' version of that song. Lead rooms here. Now, I do a weird thing with, or a slightly weird thing with how I do this. So let's say I have a lead part here. The part is, for the purposes of this video, I am doing a cover of Starlight Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog 1, and the lead part in the chorus, as I'm going to do it, is like this. Etc., etc. Lead room, what I would do with that is I would take that lead part, it's literally just like super distorted thing, with a reverb on it, just a medium room. I would take that lead part and I would drop it down the octave. And what that is supposed to do, and what its function is that it allows the lead guitar, like that upper part, it allows that to pop a bit more. It creates like this emphasis on this lead guitar, and it makes it feel thicker, is how I'm going to put it. But as you'll come to discover, I do a lot of low-end cutting on these room leads that do the dubs, as what they're called. Etc., etc. Next thing you'll probably want to look into, I have to be careful with playing this, is sort of like an ambient, like, background patch. Specifically this guy. Yeah, get on with it. Okay. This is sort of a sound that I'm ripping straight out of post-rock, which is just putting a delay in front of like all the distortion and making the delay be super loud. This actually is a sound that I copied out of a Helix native patch called Bulb Ambient. Back when I actually think it's been taken out since this, since I made this, so I always have to make sure that I have this particular patch still available. And this is the patch that I use for a lot of the post-rock stuff in the background of Vengeful Spirit. So this is that patch. Really, this is kind of all that, like, that stuff that I've explained. You don't even really need the post-rock sound or the lead dubs. You could get away without using them. But this should just about cover everything that you'll need. Those that I've covered, like the clean bass, the distortion bass, the rhythms, the two leads, and the clean tone. That should cover it. Something else I do is I do this, like, oh, where is it? I don't think I even have one anymore. Okay. But, like, I'll create, I have this kind of, like, ska-ish tone that I use, where I do literally things like, that kind of thing. It's just a really cool, like, little thing I can do. It's actually in the background of, it's in the background of a good chunk of the songs on Vengeful Spirit, but it's most prevalent in my mind in, frick, what's the song called? Dark Heart. It's in the background of Dark Heart. Just hear me going. Good little bit of emphasis. You've probably heard it on some other songs that I've done. That just about covers it for guitar tones. Hopefully this was at least somewhat informative. So next week, I'm going to go through making a recording template and making a drum sound, choosing a song, and arranging it. So, thank you guys for joining me, and I'll see you in the skies, Dragonites. All the best, and take care.